In this episode, we sit down with Dr. Vincent Ruiz, a former U.S. Army veteran whose 12-year service led him through intense combat and personal battles. After facing heroin addiction and a near-death experience, Dr. Ruiz transformed his life, becoming a leading therapist dedicated to challenging perceptions and fostering resilience. Join us as he shares his journey from the front lines to healing minds, offering insights and tips that will inspire and provoke thought that will allow you to make changes immediately. Tune in.
All right. Well, we're super happy to have Vince Ruiz on our show. And I got to give just a shout out right off the bat to the guy that put us together. That's Monty Heath, who's one of my favorite human beings on the planet, who's got a heart as big as his body. So anytime he recommends somebody, I jump on it. And first off, Dr. Ruiz, thank you for your service. You gave us 12 years with the U.S. Army. So I know that really shaped your life. And I like to have a defined moment from your years in service before we get into what you do in present day. Let's talk a little bit about the journey your life has been on and significantly shape your perspectives on life and your resilience. Can you give us a little background on who is Dr. Ruiz?
Yeah, I'll give you the Netflix preview version. Student athlete as a young person, right? And I think a critical time, I always recall 7th grade, I got cut from the A team or the star team and I put him in the B team or whatever. And two things happened in that. It was ice hockey specifically. One is my grandfather was like, if you quit now, you may never stop, number one. Now, mind you, he stormed the beaches in Normandy and fought through Europe, built a business after, right? His frame of reference. So that was a critical moment where I just learned that, like, all right, I don't want to be known as a quitter. I just don't want to be known as a quitter, right? So I make the A team the next year. We go to nationals, and that just begins the story of hockey. And I'm all in through high school. I end up playing collegiately. I was recruited by Derek Lalonde. He was recently let go by the Red Wings. He sat in our living room, and first professional challenge from the outside my little incubated area of like, hey, I think you're this big, but you might be this big. We just don't know yet. So played a little collegiate ice hockey and was moving along. And then 9/11 happened. And I'm from New Jersey. I have family from New York. I was born in New York, and it was immediate impact, a call to action. And I would argue if 9/11 doesn't happen, I may or may not serve in the military. I don't know for sure. And the goal and intent was like, how quickly can I get involved in some capacity, way, shape, or form? And my uncle, who served in Vietnam in the 173rd, and my grandfather both said, if you're going to enlist, you want to enlist in Ranger Regiment, and you want to try to get to Delta Force as fast as you possibly can. Now, these are the wise old men in my story, and I declined all of that and didn't listen to any of their wisdom, and I went into civil affairs because it fell under the special operations umbrella. It was a much softer side of it, and I don't regret it because it led to some of the things you asked about: experience, testing, persistence, resilience, development. And I don't know if I would have gotten the opportunities I did if I didn't choose that route. And that's all happenstance, right? So I enlisted, and when I was finishing training, the invasion of Iraq happened, and I was at Fort Bragg. And Fort Bragg is the kind of place that's upset when there's no war going on, if that makes any sense, right? And when I got there, I figured out really quickly as a young kid, I was like, oh, these men, and there's like onesie, twosie women, these men are really, really serious about this, and they've been doing it a very, very long time. So those are some of my first professional tests of like, am I going to be respected? Can I be accepted? Can I perform at this level and task? And then a series of deployments just accumulated over time where I started to form and shape my worldview about myself, about the world, about others involved in the world. And the test of resilience came on many different fronts, whether it was on the battlefield or back home during that decade or so. I mean, I have a divorce to show. I've struggled with trauma and addiction. I've moved around a little bit. I've been estranged from family, and I was complicit in every little bit of it. And I think the resilience was really tested, not in the toughness and tenacity of the battlefield. It was actually towards the end of my time in service when I was struggling the most with my mental health. So that's how we got here.
So you just kind of touched upon it, but doing a little bit of the background, talking to your friends, I kind of want to go back. You mentioned the word addiction, and I know that became a huge, because there's thousands of people suffering from addictions of all kinds, not only substance, but mental, everything. Addiction is just a broad-based word, but to really identify with the listener right now who may be struggling with something, do you mind go into that little part of your life a little bit and kind of exploring that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a super dark period of time. So my last deployment was to Afghanistan, and I spent a year in Kunar province up on the Pakistani border in 2010, and it was a very contested part of the battlefield. I probably had PTS long before that, but it was the first time the symptoms came up to the surface. And my boss essentially pulled me aside and was like, "Hey, like, you're showing types of behavior that aren't consistent with what you need you to be doing." So that was the first red flag, but I paid it no heed. And in my ignorance or arrogance, I didn't do anything about it. So flash forward, we come back to the States, and the time goes on. I'm drinking much more heavily than I've ever drank before. Like Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. Now it's Thursday morning, Thursday for lunch. Now it's Friday morning, Friday middle of the break, Friday at lunch. And then in that winter leading towards the middle, like November, December 2011, I found the right person or wrong person I was looking for. And she was using heroin at that time. And I found exactly what I was looking for, because a shot of heroin, I was an IV drug user, is like a warm hug. And I look back on it now as an academic and a practitioner of counseling. I would tell somebody when they come in my office, and I tell them often, if somebody's struggling with drugs and alcohol, I would say, "Hey, I'm super grateful that that's what you're struggling with right now, because we can talk about that." Because I also struggled with suicidal and homicidal ideation during that period of time, right? And so if I take my own life in that period, right, I make this emotional decision, and whether it's caused by psychosis due to the drugs or just behaviors I'm not managing, that could happen. And I could have very well easily hurt somebody significantly, because the minute you're involved in heroin and cocaine in the streets in North Philly, Camden, New Jersey, wherever, you're in an environment that's very, very similar to the battlefield. Nothing is what it seems, and trust doesn't exist. Whereas in the battlefield, you depend heavily on the people next to you to trust them with your life. In the street, that doesn't exist. It is a zero-sum game. And so I ran the streets for a year and a half, and it escalated to degrees of criminality. I'm not proud of any of that, and I don't need to share the specifics, but that's what comes with that world. I blew through the 150 grand. That was my life savings at 32 years old, which was all the money in the world to me. My wife left and divorced me. I was estranged from my daughter, all rightfully so. They did the right thing. And so I think the critical moment in time is when I overdosed in November 12, 2012. My girlfriend at that time, junkie girlfriend, we were codependent and using. She actually rushed me to the hospital, and they saved my life with a couple shots of Narcan and a little bit of electricity to kind of bring us back. Wow. And then I walked out of there, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I called my father. I hadn't talked to him in probably 3-4 months. And I call him from the hospital, and I'm like, "Hey, you were right." Because in August that summer, he called me to come meet him at a park, very neutral site. I hadn't talked to him in years. He's like, "Hey, you're my son, and I love you, and I'm very afraid I'm going to lose you. The things that you're doing and you're engaged in right now, there's one of two outcomes. You're going to die in the street, or you're going to go to prison for a really long time," right? And I was okay with all of that. Sure enough, 3 months later, that happens, and I call him immediately, and I'm like, "Hey, Dad, you were right. What happened?" One thing led to the next. And then by the following day, I was on my way to treatment, and I would go to spend 93 days in an inpatient hospital. And that would be very much a tipping point, much like Grandpa in 7th grade saying, "Hey, don't start quitting now," about something that I want, right? Well, there and then, it's the other side of it. I needed to learn how to surrender in a very real way. And that's counter to a warrior's ethos. Oh, man. So, yeah, that's how we got there.
Unbelievable. Facing a near-death experiencing like that is profoundly transformative, needless to say. Please, if you don't mind, and thank you for being so candid, because that's what's riveting, and that's what gets people's attention, other than, "Hey, I can help you," But if you've lived it, you can truly, mesh with someone's, situation. But if you don't mind describing that moment where you decided to get help, what was that internal shift that really provoked that decision?
I've shared this before, and I would tell anyone, it's the modern day miracle. I knew I was done.
Really?
So in Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, in many of those programs, they're referred to as like the miracle happens, the miracle happens, the miracle. It literally was like relieved for me at that point. Now, here's the challenge, right? I didn't have the knowledge and skills in terms of how to stay clean. Right? Getting clean is easy, right? They can put you in jail for long enough, right? Or they can isolate you in a rehab, right? Or wherever you need to go. Yet the addictive behaviors in terms of my psyche were the challenge and problem. So in that 90 days, to your question, is what I learned is this a really basic skill that I think is really important for anybody that's wanting to change in anything. It's close-ended. Does this help me or hurt me? So at that moment in time, somebody was like, hey, Vince, does heroin help you or hurt you at this point? And I had to come up with a list. Hey, it helps me, right? I don't have to pay attention. It doesn't make me feel whatever, right? It does help me in some ways. How does it hurt you? And then you run down the list of how it hurts, right? I'm exposing myself to all sorts of illnesses, disease. I don't know what I'm shooting, whatever, right? My family, finances. I'm a burden on the community and society beyond my own family, right? And the last part of it is, hey, what does this say about me? And you got to fill that in. And in that space, in that 93 days, that's what I did is like, hey, this says this, this, and this. And then having good people around me at that point in my life, they were like, hey, that's a great point. That's super, super self-aware. And this person naturally led into emotional intelligence. You know, hey, you have awareness now. So the next thing is regulation. What are you going to do about it? So, well, I'll go to some meetings. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't believe. So I start going to meetings when I get to the hospital. And then I hit, 45 days where I made a meeting. 45 days straight, and it was a recommendation. It was very hard to do, and I feel like I'm not getting anything. I'm not changing. And I turned to the guy that's encouraging me, and I'm like, "Hey, I've done this 45 days straight." He's like, "Nothing's changing. My life is still the same. I owe a ton of money to the government, right? I have no money of my own. My kid doesn't talk to me. My ex-wife won't pick up the phone, and my dad's starting to meet me for coffee once in a while, just to kind of see and measure, like, how's he looking? I'm gainfully employed at this point. I'm starting to work again, and kind of figure out what that looks like, and the biggest thing in that moment is he said, hey, it's been 45 days. When's the last time you did anything for 45 days? I was like, I used to shoot dope all the time, every day. I never missed a day. And so he's like, hey, you've been clean an extra 45 days because you just make these meetings and continue to make these meetings. And then it expanded upon the miracle that had happened when I went to rehab. I was like, I knew I'm kind of done, right? It was like, oh, wait. If I stay this course, right, the seventh wonder, something of the world, compounding interest, it's our behaviors just the same. So our dollars and behaviors work just like the market. It's just hard to see it when we're in it, when it's doing that. The idea is that the S&P is going to end up here. So if I reflect that in my life and I'm constantly auditing and managing my fund, the fund of Vince, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, vocationally, socially, and of course the final domino, financially, I'm going to start to put myself at a competitive advantage because I start to find people like Spencer, like Terry, and like David, and of course our mutual friend Monty, right? I start to find people that are looking to rise the boats and the tides and all that stuff. So that's the short version of how it all started. And then I just went wild because there was a lot of people that knew me as this, and they would have been happy for me to stay like that. And I just made a concerted effort and decision to just blind fury. I'm either naive, ignorant, or courageous, depending on how you tell the story. I think Monty would say naive and ignorant. But I feel a little courageous at times because I had to go back to college at 33, right? I'm leading men in combat and battle, and now I'm in a college class. And the gift, this is how the gift happens. My first professor for information literacy was Dr. Lem Burnham. He was a Vietnam veteran in the Marine Corps in combat. And then he came back and played for the Philadelphia Eagles. And then he was their sports psychologist for a period of time in the Philadelphia sports teams. He pulled me aside and said, hey, you're coming back to school, adult student, things like that. He's like, military, that's great, wonderful. Because I feel like I'm like clean and sober. I figured it out. And he's like, none of these students care what you did over there or what you've done the last 12 years. He's like, nor do I either, actually. He's like, I'm proud of your service. I'm grateful for it. He's like, whatever you do the rest of your life is going to be much more telling because you're going to live longer, older than you are young. And so meeting these people and they share the sage wisdom, it's like, then I started hanging on the words. When I hear those things, I'm like, oh, I got to hang on that. Like, oh, shoot, what if I do make it past 40? Oh, shoot, what if I do make it past 60? The way things are going, it's not going to be uncommon for people to pass the century mark, right? And so I share that is that I didn't have those perspectives when I was in the heat of battle out in Baghdad or Afghanistan. It was the enemy, it was us versus them, point blank period. Geopolitical situation doesn't matter. So it's a lot of it was emotional maturity and growth so I could work through those steps and change the version of Vince.
Vince, you often hear about people changing after they have to hit rock bottom. Yeah. Is that true?
I don't know if that's true or not because I've heard so many stories, right? I would say this is that the bottom doesn't really exist. There's actually trapdoors and you can go further down. Because in America, I mentioned the S&P, right? But here's what I found out. Our systems, whether it's MasterCard or the IRS or whoever, they will allow you to go past zero.
Yeah.
And they will allow you to keep going past zero. Right. And then what happens is I'm doing well. I'm 2 years in this. I'm getting clean, but I haven't seen an accountant in years, right? And I'm walking home and some guy jumps out of the bushes asking if I'm me from the government, right? So I share and disclose all these things to you. Not that I was doing anything illegal or illicit. I didn't even know what I was doing, but I cleared out IRAs. I cleared out things like that. And they wanted They wanted their money for that stuff, right? So I'm giving the short version of kind of some of the things that unfolded because I also had legal issues, right? I also I'd been arrested with intent to distribute a whole bunch of heroin on me. The only thing that saved me was the judge was a veteran and the prosecutor was trying to make an example of me. The only thing that saved me was where I was arrested in Essex County, New Jersey, Newark Airport, that Newark area. Violent crime would have kept me in there, right? It was more like, hey, you're here for a day. We trust that you're going to come back. And so then I didn't go back. And so then clearly there's a warrant for me. So I'm in the sobriety process and all this stuff is the lingering effects of just poor choices and behaviors. But I'm doing well at this point. And so I call a friend of mine. I won't disclose who he is. And I'm like, hey, can you look up my stuff in your system? Law enforcement officer. He plugs it in. And he's like, and this is a really good friend of mine. He goes, what did you do, dummy? He's like, you go to Florida, they're bringing you back to New Jersey, dude. You go to California, they're bringing you back. As a matter of fact, the only way you're getting out of this, I think, is if you leave the country, dude. And so here's the thing in my head. I'm like, maybe I'll go to the Foreign Legion. Maybe I'll go to South America. Maybe I'll do that, right? And the reality, I wasn't doing anything. I needed to face that down. So that was part of it, dealing with the legal ramifications. And I think what keeps people stuck in addiction specifically, and it's not limited to drugs. It can be sex. It can be shopping. And nowadays, gambling, forget about it. They're attacking 18 to 25-year-olds. They meaning the monster that passes the legislation policy and runs the companies. And they're doing it really well. That's a tangent. But at the end of the day, it's coming down to ask that question. Hey, does this help me or hurt me? And what does it say about me? Humans are smart. They got to fill it in.
So good.
And if somebody comes and they're using drugs and alcohol, it's not like, hey, let's stop immediately. Like, let's figure out what's the reasons to stop. And do you even want to stop? Because nobody spits out a good shot of scotch. Nobody spits out a 12-year-old scotch. Nobody spits out a good shot of Colombian heroin. A good toot of Colombian raw. Like, it just doesn't happen, right? Nobody makes a wager when they go to Vegas, even though they know they shouldn't be doing it the mortgage or not, because they're looking to get that hit of whatever they're trying to get hit, distract and avoid. And they've been habituated to it. And so we're in a world, in my estimation, and this is, again, the academic of me, and this is the person who runs a business dealing with behavioral health. We are in a traumatized society currently that is addicted to stress. Right. And meaning this is right. If I'm getting that hit of stress and I can keep my cortisol level hovering wherever I need it to be, it's all accessible for all of us at all times. And we're complicit in it. I include myself. I'm very much complicit in that stuff too. So, yeah.
There's an interesting book on called Dopamine Nation, which says it all. We're looking for hits on dopamine. We're on our phone scrolling and, one after the other. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And, they always, in professional sports, they often talk about, especially in the NFL, they would have exit strategies for the guys that were leaving the sport, and talk about, the abuses which is the addictive behaviors, gambling, sex, drugs, alcohol, and spousal abuse. That aggressiveness, and they really now work on a lot of that because it's been such a problem, not just obviously in the military, but also in professional sports, life after professional sports. Yeah. Especially with the concussion stuff that goes on.
Yeah. CTE, traumatic brain injury, any of that stuff is very relevant. I saw an interesting study a couple years ago. Soccer players experience the most CTE. I wasn't aware of that. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, oh, yeah, they're always hitting the ball. Anyway, so, I mean, that's stuff that's very real, and it starts at a very young age. And it doesn't take much to rattle that thing, I have found.
Boxing too. Your boxing and martial arts kicks to the head all the time. Yeah. Look at Muhammad Ali, all the shots he took. Yeah,
absolutely. So I have a son, and I'm a big sports guy. And actually, I tease my wife all the time. I'm like, I don't know if I want him to play contact sports. And I love sports. And I'm like, but the head, and because I just know what can potentially come of that, right? Like I cannot know that. And not that my parents were wrong. I think they were doing what they thought was the best thing. But I think about getting my bell rung and some of the effects of it. Yeah. And then I tease her and I'm like, I think equestrian, tennis, auto sports, and sailing are what I want to play. She's like, you just read that off the Rolex site. I was like, well, I just want to start there though, right? But
or you can be like Monty, do the arm wrestling.
The arm wrestling, right? I like a shoulder or an elbow is a much better way to go. So I think you bring up something interesting. Me and Monty are very passionate about it. It sounds like you guys are, based on your work and what I saw on the site, is the physical part of it, right? Is I think some folks get wrapped around the axle. Like, a physical practice has to be an explicit thing, and you got to follow steps, and it has to be nice and clean, neat and clean. And you have to do this and you have to do that. I'm at a point where I think I've met enough people, and this is 10,000 plus hours of providing individual therapy. Is like, go for a walk and eat a healthy meal and have a healthy conversation, and you're like at a competitive advantage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, let's not complicate it, right? Like, if you want to be Arnold, be Arnold. If you want to go to the CrossFit Games, if you want to get ready to become a SEAL, be a SEAL. Yet, as a good citizen and a responsible citizen, it's like, go for a walk, eat a healthy meal, have a good conversation. Yeah. I would say most people, regardless of demographics, would be better served just to implement that. That's the quickest hacker fix, I think.
Do you realize Vince just mentioned how we were taught in chiropractic, the triad of health: mental, nutritional, physical. They really need to be. So you said it. You know, have a good meal, go for a walk, and have a good conversation with somebody. You know, and feeding it on. That was good, Vince. You did that instinctively, but that is perfect. Yeah. Hey, let me ask you, overcoming the addiction, and I'd love to know what inspired you and in your career path that you've chosen. Obviously, we all like to help others, but I bet it goes a little bit deeper. Can you share what you're thinking?
I had an amazing therapist when I was inpatient, Maria Garcia. She wasn't a veteran, or she didn't talk much about her service. I shouldn't say that. I don't know. She might have been. Yet she played a profound role in that period of time, because the heroin really was what got me there, right? But they're doing all the assessments of my PTS, right? And I was presenting a lot of depressive stuff. So did a lot of behavioral therapy, rational mode behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy to sort through it. And 2 weeks into the treatment, she pulls me aside. She's like, hey, I have some good news for you. She's like, you absolutely rate opiate use disorder, right? That's part of it. She's like, have you ever talked to anybody about post-traumatic stress? And I was like, how dare you? Blasphemy, arms folded immediately. I was like, no, please tell me more about this thing, right? Civilian sitting in this comfortable little office, right? So she goes into it. She reads some good examples, and I'm like, ooh, that might be me. She's like, I want you to go to this other group next week. So I go into this other group. Now it's filled with guys all from Lejeune, all the Marines from Lejeune, all the guys from Fort Bragg, a few people from Monty's neighborhood in Virginia, whatever, right? We're all in there, and I'm just listening to the stories. Oh, something. I feel angry, start yelling at my wife, whatever. I'm like, I'm divorced. I don't need that. Hey, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and patrol my backyard to check the perimeter. I'm like, ooh. I'm looking around like, And I see the other guys going, yep. But internally, I'm trying to make the connection become congruent, because I do that, right? But I don't want to acknowledge that that's part of the hypervigilance. That's part of the behavior in terms of how my trauma has been expressed.
Oh, my God.
Right? So I hear that, I see that, I go, okay, cool. I'm like, this is it. I go back to Maria the next week. I'm like, hey, about that diagnosis, I think you might be onto something. Tell me more. She's like, hey, cool, this. Hey, take a read of this. Achilles in Vietnam was the book she gave me. It's a series of vignettes where they run parallels between Vietnam and Homer's The Iliad. And the language that's used and the syntax in terms of how they're the same thing. There's nothing new under the sun in terms of what warriors experience. There's just nothing new under the sun. We just think it's new and unique to us because it's the first time we experience it. Oh. To be frightened like that, scared like that. Oh, I can't believe a human that can happen, or this can happen, or the road can be disappeared, or a building can go. Those are we have very, very normal reactions and responses to abnormal circumstances. Right? We have very, very normal responses and reactions to abnormal circumstances. Combat and war create that. So that diagnosis comes, and I start to become more accepting because the camaraderie of the other guys sharing their stories about the behaviors, things they're doing. And now I don't feel isolated. So on that petri dish, right, I'm no longer that neuron that's like trying to grab and cling to life, right? I'm that neuron that's binding, right? And the synapses are going from this to that, and now we're cohesive. I know your listeners won't be able to see that, but it's wrapped tight, it's strong, right? As opposed to from a distance, that's what was happening. So, right, literally in the physical sense of life, I'm starting to make those changes. And at that time, transcranial magnetic stimulation was kind of a thing. It's being researched. And one of the psychs there, he pulled me aside. He was like, hey, all your criteria assessments, you're an ideal candidate of this because some of the depressive symptoms. You want to give it a try? I was like, well, you're not going to like cut out my eye and like take a look or anything, are you? Right? Because I knew enough about that, right? And he was like, no, we stopped doing that a while ago. I was like, oh, okay, what are we talking about? Like hallucinogenics? What are we talking about? And he's like, no, it hooks up and we're gonna stimulate your parietal lobe, right? And then boom, I did 5, 6, 7 treatments of that, and I was like, oh wow, I'm not as depressed as I once was when I entered here. So I've been the benefactor of just being open-minded and being humble enough to know that I didn't want to go back to the anger, the rage, the version of Vince that was of no use to our community or society, because that's what I was. I was a liability through and through to everyone and everything. And I'm humble enough at this space to say that, and there's no pressure on any other guy or gal to acknowledge or say that. But I would argue that if you look in your prisons, yes, there's a lot of mental illness and there's a lot of bad stuff that people do. Some are beyond redemption in my estimation. That's having worked with that population. However, I would say like 80% of the men and women there probably just needed a hug at some point in their life.
Wow. Unbelievable.
I'm making that number up, but I would say that most of the men, because between 0 and 3, maybe they got it, maybe they didn't get it, right? 3 to 10, they did or didn't get it, right? And 10 to 18, 12 to 18, they did or didn't get it. But by the time a kid hits like 10 to 12, there's some predictors you can kind of tell where they're going to head to. Not always, but I think, you have a good idea. And those traumatic experience and that traumatic background, traumatic societies, traumatic neighborhoods, not everybody's exposed to that, but at some point, everybody is exposed to pornographic stuff in some way, shape, or form. And that can easily traumatize somebody if they're not equipped, emotionally prepared to understand what they're trying to make sense of. And that's why I hate the term that's universal, the big picture is, we live in a traumatized society because people see stuff on Fox News, CNN all the time that can rattle you. Hey, that plane hits a helicopter yesterday evening, tragic accident outside of DC. In my estimation, that's enough for somebody if they don't have the bandwidth to understand what they're seeing, what actually happened. Those are human beings that are involved in that.
Yeah.
So I'm giving an example. I just find that those are common trends that come up.
Let's talk pasta, oats, grains, and more. I'm gluten-free, and this one item I can have without any consequences. Since we always talk about fueling our bodies the right way, that's where Guardian Grains comes in. No kidding. Their products are a massive shift towards healthy eating. Guardian Grains is all about healthy, sustainable grains that not only taste great, but are great for you and the planet. Whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, Guardian Grains has you covered with all kinds of nutrition that keep you going strong. Perfect for long days of just living life. Plus, knowing it's sustainably grown, that's a win-win. Sincere appreciation goes to the Guardian Grains for sponsorship of this episode and for making it easy to stay healthy while supporting sustainable farming. Click the link below the description to buy some of your own. You'll taste the difference.
Vince, you talk about, or you make reference to PTS, post-traumatic stress, but we've always learned it as PTSD. Is there a reason why you dropped the D?
That's my pet peeve. Look, the D is for what I put on our billing stuff to make sure that the insurance companies pay everything. That's because that's the language that the DSM suggests we need to use, so it's a universal language. I drop it because I think it makes it less intrusive for humans to be open to. Because I think about my experiences having been a patient and a client, and I think about how my clients receive me. Right, I'm a pretty intense human. Let's not jump into talking about disorders.
Love that.
Let's start with what are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, because it's less intrusive and there's less of a weight on the shoulders when I hear that. Because the minute I hear disorder, I don't even hear post-traumatic stress anymore. I just hear disorder, and all of a sudden I start to behave and it becomes self-fulfilling, right? And I think the veteran community does that very well. There's pariahs that prey on that, and that's how they keep their not-for-profits going, and they fund them. We got 22 a day. Everybody's homeless. Every veteran's struggling. All true, and I don't want anyone to struggle. Yet I don't know if just continuing to beat that drum solves the problems. I think a lot of times it's, hey, how do we reframe the language so people can have some hope?
You are impressively sharp, man. Really, I love what you're doing, and this is really just you're glib. You're able. You're verbose. It's something that you create a level of credibility that is fantastic. It's very intriguing. So thanks. I have a question.
To let you know, Vince, this is a video as well as audio, so people are going to see your stuff as well as your purple jacket. So just to let you know, it's all there for you. So you make all the hand gestures you want.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Great. That's good to know. It's good to know.
Vince, tell us what H-Hour is. You've engaged in that numerous discussion on mental health.
Yeah, so my business is H-Hour. So that came about in I finished undergraduate, some great mentors and relationships. The young man that taught me to do APA was like a 20-year-old student that wasn't very confident socially, whereas I'm very more outgoing. So that student became a friend of mine early in my academic career. I used to still send him, well, not anymore, but I used to send him my APA papers to take a look at and sort through, right? So that's being open to new relationships, right? Here's the civilian young person. I don't know anything about them, but they have become this friend at this phase. So H-Hour was born out of a lot of that stuff, meaning this, right? I look at the lens in the world through, like, we do things in a pragmatic way over long periods of time, whether we know it or not, right? And H-Hour within a military operation is the hour that the operation commences. The most common one, if you were to Google search or ChatGPT, it will reference June 6, 1944. 0630 is when the beaches were supposed to be hit, right? Well, H-Hour is specific just to any military operation, and that time can be very different depending on the operations come. So for me, it just made sense in my language. So I get to graduate school, and then I'm doing my counseling degree, and I'm meeting all these people that do not see the world like this guy at all. It was the best possible environment I could ever be in. Politically, socially, they just see the world very different than me. There's no veterans in the class at that time, and I'm like getting exposed to a very different side of the world. More maturity, more growth. So the first name was 11th Hour, reference to World War I. And this, okay, I like that, but H-Hour, because the business I'm going to build is generally going to be billing on an hourly scheduler scale, and it's going to be designed like that and woven with people's storyline, because the tagline is the moment when. And so if we reference back to what I shared, 0630, H-Hour, right? Well, the moment when for those men at that time, I don't believe there are any females that were invasion, but those men, that was their H-Hour. That was their moment when. And similar to what I shared to you about my recovery, man, November 12th, overdose, November 13th, not sure, November 13th, that's the moment when, hey, I got to do something different. I'm going to go forward, right? So I disclose that with clients when they come in my office, that H-Hour is very much that for them. It's to be internalized, adopted, stolen, use it as you need. And then we have fun with it because H is a fun letter. Hey, that H is redundant. It's just hour. So client, what do you think H should mean for you? Heart, humble, hope, honor, harvest. I'm trying to harvest a new life. And so I'm planting seeds in therapy so I can start to harvest 6 months later some of the reward, right? And then we start getting into like, hey, now you plant these seeds physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, into whatever the skills, whatever you need to support that thing. And then you go back, hey, what crops did you get? Hey, these crops died. So, hey, we need to water them a little bit. You need to find new people. So that's all H-Hour stuff. That's the H-Hour. That is what it is. People hit those moments when, because the moment when now, I planted the seed, that's a moment when. Hey, then I go back to check and tender. Hey, here's my harvest. That's the moment when. Hey, what did I learn from this? I got to do it again. That's the moment when. And I keep sequencing that along and along and along again. Yeah.
Have you ever had anybody honestly say the H stood for hell?
Yeah, I've had people say everything. Happy hour is the one people default to, typically the people that struggle with alcohol, right? But like, I allow folks to have their discretion. And there's probably, like, I would say my wife and I did the exercise when we redid our website. I looked at my notes because I keep the notes that clients give. I had like 53 versions of H that were all valid to their story. Wow. Humans are smart.
But it's generally supposed to be a positive perspective,
always.
Right?
Yeah, okay. Always. Yeah. That's the point. So that was how we came up with the name. And then it was, hey, I want to build an individual practice. And I used to say cast a wider net, right? Because in my mind, it was like, that's what it is. And it's simply not. My clinical director said, hey, we're just here to serve more humans. Human hour.
Yeah.
So be around super smart people, right? They're just going to make you smarter. And the ironic, my clinical director, Brooke, she was my clinical supervisor for 3 years. So she knew all the inner workings of what I was doing. And when I asked her, I was like, hey, I can't afford to pay you what you're worth. I was like, but I'm doing this thing. And when you're ready, I'd love to have you come over and figure it out.
That's so good. Hey, could you give us an example that maybe an early first example, you go, wow, this stuff works, or even something recent that was, I love clinical blowaway stories. So if you got one, please share.
I'll give you, right? So ethically for us, at least in counseling, there's this gray area of like you asking for Google reviews or having people put your stuff, like it's hard. You can't, right? Like, hey, I was telling Dr. Vince about the infidelity of my marriage and now I'm loyal to my wife again. Like nobody's putting that on Google ever again, right? But however, pause for effect. I was working in community mental health at this point before H-Hour, getting my hours done, right? Supervised hours. I'm trying to accrue them as fast as I can to get out there and do H-Hour, right? And I had a client go into Google, put a review for me in there. And he basically says, hey, I met Vince. I was a real fat ass and I was struggling and miserable and using drugs. I'm not fat anymore. I'm not struggling. I don't use drugs. Go talk to Vince.
Oh, wow.
Which led to a corporate client reaching out that didn't know I was a counselor saying, hey, is this you? I just saw, is that you? And I'm like, yeah, that's me. And now I do their corporate stuff in their human resources training and development stuff. So that is just being open-minded and open-hearted to it. However, this is the part I'm getting to is flash forward. Those text messages from clients of that nature, those are the examples. Hey, Vince, you were right. You know, my business finally did $1 million winter. All I had to stop doing was lying about this particular part of my life. It had nothing to do with me trying to create this thing. It was just because that was the distraction, taking the attention. Hey, Vince, I wanted to stop using drugs and alcohol. I know you couldn't help me with what I needed, but you referred me to the program inpatient I needed. I can't wait to come back to treatment. Hey, Vince, I was thinking about killing myself and then I met you, period. Wow. So that's the validation. I share and disclose those things. My wife is always like, how are you going to share that message and tell that story? I was like, I don't know. I think it just breathes and lives among itself, because when people meet me, I want them to go back to their dining room table or their boardroom or breakfast table. And then it's not even about me. I just want them to have that good energy and a little bit of that hope, right? Human hour, hope hour, harvest hour, whatever they need, right? Like that's what it is. And those are the stories, is because I think the H-Hour thing is, it's powerful, it's valuable. And I think conceptually, when somebody's trying to overcome the greatest adversity they've known, it's like an invasion into Europe. And whatever that scene in Cyberprime Ryan is, might not be what the physical realm is, but intellectually and emotionally, that person is exactly like that scene on the beach in Cyberprime Ryan. Intellectually and emotionally, without fail, if they've made it into my office at that point, the monkeys are out of the cage and they're running wild. and we got to get them back in the cage, and we got to learn how to feed them or starve them, because the quickest way to kill something is starve it. Easiest way anyway.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, they talk about stigma remains still a big barrier when addressing addictions, right? And how do you work towards changing perceptions? Because perception is everything. And what advice do you have for individuals hesitant to actually seek help based off these sociological judgments?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the two words that are kind of feed that, right? And many times, have you heard of the term coping skills? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. They're valuable. They're wonderful tools, right? And we need them, and we need to teach them and use them. Yet I think the word change is essentially synonymous in the dictionary. I mean, we could Google it right now. It's essentially one or two words off. I think fundamental life change is much more powerful than cope. Hey, client, do you want to learn how to cope, or do you want to learn how to create a fundamental life change? So now we're at a decision, right? And so at that point in time, if you're learning to cope, some of the stigma, labels, and bias and judgment are probably they're designed to be that way, like with your friends, your family, how you are, where you are. Maybe you have to make amends for a lot of things and you're preferred to go that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's often a start point. Is you got to learn new coping skills. It might mean harm reduction. Right? So because your family might not be okay with you taking Suboxone or methadone or an antabuse of some sort, or medication or pharmaceuticals, or going to therapy because they may not believe. So to your point, that's all the stigma, label, bias stuff comes up, right? When a human is ready, similar to what I shared about myself, to create fundamental life change, well, maybe they have hit that metaphorical rock bottom or the trapdoor below it. And maybe in that space is where they go, yeah, coping's what I've been doing. I've been shooting dope to cope. Not working, right? I have to create a fundamental life change. I would argue, Dr. Terry, your question is like, I think that sheds stigma, label, and bias, because it speaks to the divinity of the individual. You're able to rise above what other people think because it doesn't matter. You're so hyper-focused on your dimensions of wellness at that point. The people that you're supposed to make amends with, they'll be there and will present the opportunity for you to do so. The new people you are inviting into your life for the rest of your life, because you're going to live longer, older than you were young, whether you stop using at 60 or stop using at 16, right? That I would say is how you shed it. And that's the thing. If somebody that's trying to get clean and sober is looking to somebody else to get approval about how they do it, you're looking in the wrong places. Because that's inside you, right? Because if I point, I'm like, oh, Dr. Terry judged me. Dr. Spencer, how many fingers are going back at Vince? Right? And I gotta think about that. Am I being a great teammate to Vince first and foremost before I could be to my wife or my kid? Am I being a great? Yeah. No. Yes. No. Yes. No. Hey, this one right here, right? Hey. Am I being a great? Am I practicing quitting? The good kind, not the bad kind. Because there's two different types, right? Yeah. Am I always trying to win?
Wow.
And in my estimation, right, because we're pointing to the stigma, we're pointing to the label, we're pointing to the bias. We just got to tell 3 better stories to ourselves and be that example for the people that are ready to hear that and see that. That's it.
My gosh.
Because it's hard. Because if I tell people out here, I'm like, hey, I used to be a dope fiend, right? My students wouldn't believe it. There's no way.
Yeah.
I traded my beret and my ID card for a ski mask, a pistol, and a syringe. That's what I did. Literally. Yeah. Same behavior, same mindset. I hadn't changed. I was equally as crazy. And the worst thing about it, and I joke about Monty when I met him, I was like, dude, I don't even need drugs and alcohol to be crazy. And that's when we both belly laughed. And he was like, yeah, neither do I. Right? So it was like, hey, do you want to be friends? Like at that point, right? So stigma, label, and bias are very real. And when it comes to addiction, it's something I'm passionate about. And I'm very adamant about it. And it's very coming across to you. The only people that message will resonate with at this point are the folks that are ready for that. I haven't figured out a way to tailor it so that it's more inclusive, that it's maybe better received, right? Because here's the deal, right? We go to the fabric and culture of people's knowledge, their epistemology, and the observations and experiences. That's a lot of stuff to shed, right? If somebody grew up in the church, if somebody, this faith, this region, this demographic, the patterns of behavior are all the same for the addict.
But they say when the student is ready, the teacher will come.
My experience.
Yeah, or you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Okay. But you do make it attractive because you have a great way of putting it across. It makes it inviting. It's open arms. It's non-judgmental. It's comforting to those who are afraid of being judged. Yeah, it's really cool. It's good.
Because a lot of people in that crossroads. Here's the deal. This is the part, and I'm sorry to cut you off. It's important to note, right? They've overcome the stigma, label, and bias. They keep making the meetings, or they're going to therapy, or they're doing the things that they need to do for their particular recovery. And it looks very different for people, but the common thread is there's no drugs, no alcohol, no gambling, whatever the thing is that's removed, right? Yet you're still stuck with you. So that process is the fundamental life change part. Escalated into the future, if people start to go that route, it's hard to see on the beginning and the front end. And I would say my own experience, because when you're in the storm, you can't see past it. You're in it. You're in it. So like my current wife didn't exist when I was starting in the storm. You know what I mean? And when she scooped me, she got me for like 6 cents and went all in and bought the whole company. And I went back below zero somehow. Right. And she made this huge bet. And I share that as clients. I say to them, I was like, you might have to remove people in your life to make room for the right people. And sometimes that's generally family and friends. And because if you zoom out and you think about things I talk about in grad school with my counseling students is this, right? A hot topic is always LGBT issues, right? And whatever they might be in whatever way, shape, and form. And given the current geopolitical climate, comes up quite a bit for all of the reasons. But I always circle back to this, Spencer, Terry, and you'll appreciate this as providers and caretakers. It's like when that divine individual is in front of you, who cares how they got there and what they believe, right? Because we get to believe whatever we want to believe. I just need my client to know that they believe what they believe. And they're willing to change that. They're psychologically flexible. And I think that's not limited to addiction. It's to any fundamental life change. So what happens is people make that change. All of a sudden they start thinking differently, dressing differently, talking differently. Maybe they become a reader. Hey, I don't like reading. I listen to audiobooks or podcasts, right? Or whatever the stuff is that they're doing. They have to become open-minded to the possibility that they can be much, much more, much more.
You know what I love about this, Spence, is he comes from a place of authenticity.
Yeah.
And,
thank you.
I remember listening to a doctor one time trying to give me advice on eating right, yet he was overweight and smelled like cigarette smoke. Yeah. And there was no point of authenticity. So I didn't really listen to him. It's like you got to practice what you preach. So I really respect these words coming from you because they come from a huge place of authenticity. And then you back it up with academic knowledge. So kudos to you, man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I steal from all the super smart people. And I think it was either John Lennon or Nelson Mandela, right? We stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Much like yourselves. At some point, somebody came super smart before you that did all the hard work. Because people are like, oh, it's going to be so hard to go to grad school, be a doc. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm going to right click the super smart people stuff and I'm going to put it on my page and I'm going to paraphrase it. Right? And then I'm going to start to form my own clinical impressions, right? Because I've done the diligence to start having that conversation. Then I'm going to become a practitioner of the thing I espouse, right? And I think, something that I struggle with is about academia is folks think school is the only way to do it. I would tell people that, 15 minutes a day, you can become world-class in anything, I think. That's how I learned how to trade in the market, is 15 minutes a day, right? 10 minutes a day, I would read about something. 5 minutes, I would write about it. And it was painful, right? Like, I definitely made a few trades, calls, puts, something that were not favorable. Immediate impact, I learned. Got to go back, read more. Okay. Hey, intelligent investor, let me read about that. Okay, 10 minutes a day, write about it. 5 minutes, I understand this. I don't understand that. I understand this. Oh, it goes down 7%, do this. Goes down 14%, do that. It goes down 25%. There's blood in the streets. Start doing this. I didn't grow up in that world. I didn't know those things. Nobody taught those. That's not what I studied. It's not what I do. So I'm giving that as an example to show. Read 10 minutes a day about a hyper-specific topic, write about it for 5 minutes, and within a year, you're within like the top 10% of people that know about that particular thing.
What a cool idea, right?
Anybody could do that. You don't need college. Yeah. You don't need permission. Anybody can do that about anything. And so you think about it, and if you have 15 minutes in a day, and again, this is barring cognitive impairment or something like that. I got to disclose, right? That this is intelligence level matters in some of those senses, but being able to read and write, because here's what we know, right? Is that I think, man, how many Americans read a book last year? Onesie, twosie, they read one, maybe two, something. I don't know. Yeah. As I've met people along the way, to include President Bush, the cabinet secretaries, folks that are uber successful in different categories, industries, the greater majority are like voracious readers.
Yeah. Yeah.
The answers are all out there for all of us. I'm mediocre and average at most things I do, with the exception of counseling. I would say counseling is, like I feel like Muhammad Ali in The Office. Like I don't get hit too often.
That's why I kind of partnered with Spencer. He's way smarter than me, and I would say coming around with. But what's great about it is standing on the shoulders of giants. He's only 5'5", so it wasn't that hard to do that. So it's nice to be able to stand on a giant that was. I didn't have to work that hard, so it was a win-win for everybody.
So good. That's so good.
In other words, he's saying you didn't need a ladder.
So good.
Now I got my curiosity is aroused in the sense that you were in the military. Mm-hmm. There's a tremendous amount of discipline. This becomes part of you. How did you incorporate? How did you incorporate the disciplines you've learned in the military into therapy practices?
The language changes, right? That's the expert's job, is to translate it so it's understandable by the audience and whoever it is. But I'll give you the one that is, I would say every soldier at least is taught this. Marines have their different version. Navy has a different version. They all have a different version. It's like a level 1 leadership thing in terms of how you manage it. And it's an acronym. It's RMISIS. So receive the mission, initiate movement, make a tentative plan, conduct reconnaissance, issue the order, and supervise. And supervise never ends. Right. So that format and temple or model, there's plenty of veterans out there that sell that and teach that, like they invented fire and they're doing it very well and making a lot of money. And I'm proud of them for that. Yet I would tell you that that's basic level leadership stuff. Receive the mission, issue the warning order, make a tentative plan, conduct reconnaissance, right? You run down that checklist, right? So it's very similar when I translate it over to a client or a teammate, right? And I'll use the language that fits with them, right? If they're faith-based and that's a big part of their story, I'll be like, hey, in your faith, do you guys kind of have like steps and processes? And hey, what are they? Okay, like works like that. Okay. What are you into or your interests? Or I'm a sports guy. Okay, in sports, do you guys have like, how do you do whatever? And really, I'll always zoom and circle back to the same point. I'll be like, excellent. You have intimate knowledge about an operations order, whatever it is. Simple is going to serve you well.
Yeah.
Period.
Oof.
Right,
Very
because
cool.
Richard Feynman taught, right? This is me geeking out, right? Richard Feynman, right? Princeton, PhD, atom bomb. He's a little quirky, something. They said he had an IQ of 120 something. I don't believe any of that. I think he failed the test that day. But what he did is he always used an example in one of his lectures, and I love it. It's so powerful. And he says, hey, I think it's the students he's talking to. It's on YouTube, and he's like, clumsy Aunt Minnie slipped on the ice and had to go to broke her hip and had to go to the emergency room. And then he asked a question, why did clumsy Aunt Minnie slip? Right? And generally speaking, most people say, oh, because she was clumsy, or wow, she was stepped on the ice, blah, blah, blah. And he would say like, yeah, those are all the right reasons. What actually happened is that when the rubber from the sole of her shoe hit the frozen surface, the ice, a little bit of friction, we have a slippery surface, boom, she slipped, broke her hip, boom. Right? And his point being is that the word clumsy is not even relevant to the story of what happened. So I think simplicity is the point of arrival with everything. And I'm copy and pasting his stuff because I couldn't even begin to understand quantum mechanics. Yet his example right there, when we're teaching psychology or we're teaching counseling or chiropractic, right? It's like, hey, I want to take this thing that if we observe it from a distance, it's like, oh, it's because of this, it's because of that, it's because of that. No, it's the rubber hit the ice, greater friction, you slipped. That's it.
My radiology teacher in chiropractic college said something that was so profound to us because he would put up X-rays and MRIs. We couldn't see it. We would say, "What are you hallucinating?" Because we don't see that. And we would call out these like complex disorders, and he would say this magical comment: "If you hear hoofbeats, do you call it a horse or a zebra?" I go, oh, so go basic first,
Yeah.
And how many times, Dr. Terry or Vince, I mean, how many times would a patient come in and go, man, I think I got this. Always. And it's some elaborate, I go, dude, it's only 3% of the male population have that. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So that was beautiful. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. So, maintaining mental health, obviously, it's a daily, hourly job, especially if you're in that world. Sometimes we have imposter syndrome. We go, man, I'm counseling these people, but really I'm the one who's fucked up, right? So, I mean, whatever. And so what personal philosophies do you adhere to on a daily basis then, and how has it evolved through your recovery?
I think it's two-part. It's two-part. The first part is we all have 24 hours in a day. It's entirely up to me. How do I manage that? And the one thing I've learned during the academic periods, my internships, the hours, the strains on the schedule, and especially now, I still block out time for me to read and be by myself. I schedule it. Once a week, it's like barring the baby being sick or my kids being sick or my wife really needing me. It's like, no. Like I'm in the office, in the lab, thinking about whatever it is. Maybe it's Napoleon Hill stuff. I'm trying to think and grow rich. I don't know, right? But that's what I do at this point. And I didn't always have that discipline to say no to things. Hey, I got to go do this. But I have found that this is the only place that I'm able to escape and engage my imagination in an incredibly healthy way because it turns it on. So mental health day to day, that is part of it. On a personal level, I've sought therapy. That's where my dog comes in, right? My father passed in June of 23 on me and my wife's anniversary. And he asked, he's like in the hospital and, things are starting to fail, right? My mom's getting ready to make a hard decision. And he's asking, hey, is Mary pregnant? Is Mary pregnant? No, she's not pregnant. Boom. We found out she was pregnant like 3 days after he passed. I'm getting emotional thinking about that. So he's named Vincent Ruiz the Fifth, Cinco, after my father. And my wife was like, hey, this is bad. You're in a bad way, like way down. She's like, hey, we're going to go to Europe for a couple of days. So she swipes the fancy credit card. We go to Europe. And I'm like in Bavaria, depressed, eating a schnitzel and a brat, and I'm depressed. And I see these fancy dogs at a dog park in the middle of Garmisch, right? And Garmisch, I guess, is like a nicer part of a resort type of area. And I see these dogs. It looks like the AKC comes to Europe, right? And I'm like, oh, these things are amazing, right? Look at the hairdo on that one. Look at this one. This one's jumping over things, right? So I go online and I'm like, man, I want to get a dog like me. So I go right to like the local pound and I'm like, we're bailing the sucker out. It's missing an eye. It's got like a tattoo, whatever. It's got a chain. I don't know, whatever. Right? It's got a lot going on. Missing stuff. I want to heal and I want to have this dog and change this dog, right? And my wife overrules me, and that's how we got the Cane Corso, Molly Pitcher. And she named her Molly Pitcher because Molly Pitcher is from New Jersey. Her husband fell in battle, and she continued to fire on the gun. And I said, whoa, I'm not going anywhere. So if you're trying to tell me something, that's not what's happening. Wow. So as far as the self-care thing, my dog became part of that for me in like a therapeutic sense. Now, she's not a trained therapy dog, but what I needed is a reason to get out of the house and go for that walk a day.
Yes.
I needed to get out of the house and go for a walk a day because the dog needs to walk, and I can't let my dog. She's looking to go do, and all right, so I had to do that, and then I got to give her the good kibble. Can't give her the crappy kibble, so I got to give myself the good kibble. See what we're doing now? We're splitting the kibble. Nice. Right now, I have a freezer full of beef hearts and lungs and all the stuff for my dog. Right. So interestingly enough, though, how it works, and this is the belief structure, right? I'm going to share a story with you about how it got to this and what I think the health thing. The dog was part of that, and then the dog also snores like my father. Now that's true, not true. It's mildly interesting, but my mom would agree. My mom would be like, wow, that's amazing. She really does sound like your dad. Right. And she slept next to the guy for 40 something years. So she kind of knows. Right. So those are the things that are metaphysical in nature, and maybe they require a degree of faith, but it doesn't matter because I believe in it and it's encouraged me to heal. So I give you that long-winded story to share on the daily. What does it look like? I think it's being available to yourself first and foremost. Hence why I shared me blocking the time out to read and write. And I write every day. The journaling thing is an everyday practice. Because if I let the ping pong balls keep going in here, kicking around like at bingo where you do the hopper and they're right? Well, it's probably not going to help my clients. It's not going to help the podcast. It's probably not going to help my meetings later, right? I got to put some of them on paper and get my bingo placard straight. Right. So then I can see it and know like, ooh, I'm a little off today. Right. And then I get to reflect back to these artifacts. Now I have thousands of pages at this point because it's been over 10 years of doing this. I'm like, hey, what was I thinking around something January 30th, 2014? Boom. And I open it and I look at it. That was 11 years ago. I'm like, wow, like I'm not even the same person. As a matter of fact, that guy was really dumb. I don't even think the same way. Or you confirm or deny and you can look back to be like, oh, I've grown a lot, or hey, I still have that particular core quality or strength. So I think journaling is it. I think taking time out of my week. If you can do it daily, I would encourage that to anybody. I think it's intermittent flows of therapeutic process and or coaching. And I'll disclose, Monty's a wonderful coach for me. I mean, he's the kind of coach that Monty's the kind of guy that if you're on a boat with him, right, and boom, I use the boat because he's a Navy SEAL, right? Boat goes down and we crash and we're on an island, right? Monty's the kind of guy that will just take charge and start leading and put people in their strengths. Oh, you're good at picking crops. You know flowers and plants. Get us food. You know how to hunt, right? You're going to go out in the water, right? Start getting us together. And then, he's going to put people to task. Hey, what do you think you need? What do you think you need? What do you think? Oh, I need a Bible. That's a read. I need a book, right? I need entertainment. I need The Hobbit, right? Nice and thick, right? Roll through it. And then Monty will continue to organize everybody, right, and bring everybody together. Now we have entertainment. Now we have people to get food and build housing. We're leveraging skills. He's rallying people. And some people are saying, I want the Bible. I want the Torah. I want the Quran, whatever. And Monty's the kind of guy who's pretty indifferent. Like, he's kind of like, yeah, I get the one you want. That makes sense for you, whatever. And then he'll come back together at the night once we stabilize and be like, all right, you can pray in whatever book you want to pray in. I'm going to pray with you. And then we're going to watch these guys reenact The Hobbit, right? And I think that is the form of leadership that he has offered me as a coach. And I'm giving an example of stuff him and I discuss. And so that's worldview perspective, right? Like if I don't have the courage to go skiing on that mountain, right, and I don't meet him and start that conversation and those texts or quick calls like you shared, I'm using him as an example. But it's not just limited to therapy. It's not just limited to coaching. It's constantly seeking that stuff and super high quality people. I've hit it off with some and others I haven't. I think in some cases they meet a person like me who nobody knows and I bring the same energy. I think it kind of threatens some of the relationship when it's actually quite the opposite. I'm a really good student. I've run into that. I don't know what that is or where that comes from. And it's maybe looking in the wrong places because I'm a willing consumer of just people that know stuff I don't know. So I'm willing to pay people to teach me, right? And I've run into that stuff where it's like, oh, like, well, what do I have to teach you? I'm like, everything, because every single person I meet knows something I don't know, right? And I encounter that sometimes. So I share all that to say is selective attention, and then figuring out what season of life you're in. So I shared the grief version in 2023. I had to go back in therapy. I needed some therapy for a little bit because there's heavy deep stuff. Some of that resentment stuff came to the surface. I'm like, where's that? I haven't thought about it in 20 years, right? But coaching, constantly getting ourselves out there and doing things. And I also think giving is a big part of it. And I don't know how it is for chiropractic, but pro bono work plays a role for me in my self-care, right? So because I've been gifted all these opportunities, right, that maybe I worked hard for, maybe I didn't. Yet if I don't repackage them and give it to some people that could benefit from it, I would be, that's a moral failing. That's a moral failing for me, I think. So those are the self-care practices: journaling, scheduling time, making sure I stay engaged in my process. And then, making sure that I give something, right? And sometimes giving is interesting. This is important. Beginning, having somebody give Vince, you got to give, you got to start giving more. I'm like, give what? A compliment to people. Because we can't give compliments in a negative state of mind.
Oh my God.
That guy didn't have a PhD. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure he didn't graduate high school. So I share that as being open to everybody as a student and then hanging on the words that are shared. That's what I think I do well. I think I do that really well.
Terry, are you seeing a theme here? This is great. I mean, extraordinary. Vince, let me ask you, let me clarify one thing though. Are you always reading something positive and inspiring?
Season of life, it depends. I found that when I was in the dissertation for about a year and a half, I was exclusively reading about onboarding and retention. I go through seasons. It depends. I'm able to sci-fi it on a day, and I can quickly go to nonfiction. I like autobiographies. I love a stack of lies when I'm ready for it. Yeah, because anybody can write a stack of lies about themselves and then share it with the world and try to sell it, right? Like, why not, right? I think for me, I would say, can I add to the question?
Yeah.
In this vein or genre, 3 of the most important books for me was, number 1 is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I think that needs to be in our public education system like tomorrow, right? Because it gives a framework. No matter what you believe, he's just an interesting human that overcame a lot during the Holocaust to do his best work inside of a concentration camp and kind of push things forward as a psychiatrist for the mental health world. Yeah. The second book would be the autobiography of Malcolm X because it shows his road to perdition and redemption, right? And how much change he had to undergo from being a small-time junkie thief to having influence beyond something I can't even comprehend, right? Mm-hmm. Because you know you're doing something right when somebody tries to kill you. That's what my grandfather would say. And then the last part would be the autobiography of Malcolm X, right? Is because autobiography of Ben Franklin. I apologize. Because he's on the $100 bill, and why not? Like, come on, man. If you don't like the $100 bill, you're lying. You're lying. So why wouldn't I want to know a little bit about that guy? So then you get in there, right? And then boom, I open it up and I'm reading. I'm like, all right, who's this guy? He's on the 100. I don't got no hundreds at this point. 13 virtues. That's what I needed. Free of vice, free of debt, and full of virtue. Ben freaking Franklin. Oh, yeah, there you go.
That's potent.
There you go.
You know, it's fun. Thanks for sharing that, because sometimes, people like to read about something negative and downtrodden because they go, wow, I'm not that bad. I've done that before. I go, I have a lot to be grateful for because I'm not there, that kind of thing. So anyway, Vince, we're going to enter our favorite part of our, the end of our program, and it's the rapid fire questions. All right. We have 5 of them that I think you're going to do real well with answering. We try to be brief, with some concise answers, but man, listen, we get hung up on finding out more about your answer. So anyway, here we go. Are you ready for question number 1?
I am. Send it.
Word has it, you are a dog lover, and you confirmed that with your Kanye Corso. As we are as well. What is it about dogs that is so therapeutic for you?
How naive she is.
Really?
In me, because she sees me as this big.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see myself like that.
Don't you love it though?
That's what she does for me.
Oh man. How old is she?
1.5 years now. She'll be 2 this summer. Yeah. Wow. She's getting big. 96 pounds.
I was just going to ask you that next.
96 pounds. She's great. Yeah. We sunk a college education of training into her, and it's been worth every nickel. It's been worth every nickel. She's amazing. She's amazing.
You got to be able to control a dog like that, though, because they're fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Question number 2. What is the most unexpected or ridiculous lesson that you learned about survival from your military days that you still use every day in life?
On a serious note, you can do everything right and have a catastrophic outcome. You can do everything wrong and get awarded a Valor Award or medal and be known as a hero.
Nice.
Regardless of the fact that the men there know you were a dipshit.
Yeah.
I'm serious. I'm serious about that.
So true, man. That's great. Yep. Thank you. Question number 3. If you could go back in time and give your younger self just one sentence of advice, what would it be?
Don't drink. Ever.
No kidding.
No, all never, right. Ever.
There you go.
God gave me the gifts and curses of my forefathers, and we suffer for the sins of our fathers. Alcohol. I have a son. It's just not even part of it. I'm liable. That would make me do. He would be doing something that would make me not like him at that point, because we know too much at this point as a family.
No kidding.
Because people are going to want to blame genetics, behavior, environment. The AMA says that that addiction's a disease, and I'm here to tell you wholeheartedly, the AMA is wrong. It is a combination of genetics, behavior, and environment. You do get a vote, and my son will have a vote, and it'll be don't drink. So that's what I would have told my younger self.
Beautiful. Question number 4. Imagine you're stuck on a road trip with one of your past selves, the military Vince, the struggling Vince, or the therapist Vince. Which one would be the most entertaining and why?
The active addict Vince. Active addict Vince is absolutely.
I gotta know why.
Active addict Vince is absolutely insane. Absolutely. Yeah.
Come on, give me an example.
Well, it's dark, right? But if there's an addict that hears this, they'll get it. Not only did I shoot heroin, I smoked cocaine like it was a sport. And eventually, when the coke wears off, right, all the blinds are drawn. I'm crawling around on my knees looking for friggin' drywall to smoke because I think it's coke, or I'm peeking out of the blinds all paranoid, having psychotic moments. So if I was to zoom out and I was to watch that monkey in a cage, that monkey did some wild stuff. So I would watch that monkey right there. Even more so than the Battlefield monkey, because he was pretty rad too, but I didn't do anything special in battle, man. They were like, hey, stand here, look there, do this. That's what I did.
Wow. It's a good thing you didn't grow up in South Florida during the 70s and 80s, because
no, I'm not making it out of that. I'm not making it out of that.
My that movie Pain and Gain with Wahlberg and those are those are my friends. Those were friends of ours that we hung out with. It's nuts. Anyway, that's a whole nother interview. Yeah. All right. Thanks for sharing, though. Question number 5. What do you want to be remembered for?
3 things that are my values, and the statements aren't actual values. It weaves in my value sets, right? Is I want to be known, right? Everything is an afterthought, but I want to be known as the man, right, that had fun, helped people, and made money doing it.
Oh, that's good. That's good stuff.
I can't see anything else in it, and it's not limited to one or the other, but at this point, my decision-making process in my business and personal life, with everything, point blank, period. The criteria, I'm not sure, should we do it, should we not do it? Hey, can we have fun, help people, make money doing it? If we can do 2 of those 3 things as a practice, H-Hour is generally going to do it. And that means sometimes we lose some money or break even or whatever. Yet it's the right thing to do. I have a moral obligation because I'm going to live longer, older than we'd be young, right? And the multiplication effort is, hey, I did the right thing right there. I've thrown it out to the universe, and naturally what happens is that catches up in the back end. Because like I shared the market, Vince is constantly doing that, right? Like how you know Vince, right? Like, hey, it took a little bit of dip. I went short on Vince. Oh shit, I shouldn't have gone short on Vince. Now I'm losing all my money. It's going the wrong way, right? It's ultimately, in my experience, is that's what I'm known for, is having fun, helping people, and ultimately making money doing it, because that's the best way I can help my team. They can feed their families, pay the mortgage, put kids through college. I want to just be part of that story, the 0.00001% of the story, right? Because maybe it's just a name on the checks and an interaction, plussing them up for them to go build their own practice. But that's the dude I want to be known as. Like, oh, I worked for Vince for 2 years, and like, man, he set the groundwork for me to just. That's what I want. I want to have people around me that were connected to me at the right phase of life, and it's a flex. It's like, oh yeah, I bumped into Vince, and then boom, I went this way, and it's just right. That's what I would love to be known as.
Dr. Vince Ruiz, your energy is magnetic.
Thanks, Dr.
Really, no, it is. It's a draw, and when that happens, you would just consume the people that need you most, and
Hope so.
That's your task will be fulfilled forever. Thank you for being on the show, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Really.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Crackin Backs podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Crackin Backs Podcast. Catch new episodes every Monday. See you next time.